Welcome, friends, to my show at the historic Center for Photographic Art, which was founded by Ansel Adams and other luminaries 60 years ago. I'm extremely honored to fill the walls with my own work. This is an overview of about 50 years of my life in photography. I have fixer running through my veins, but I'd love to talk with you about the different sections in my show. And since we're here in this front area, let's talk about some of the 19th century processes that I absolutely love. Let's talk a little bit about this big gum bichromate print, which is about 20 by 24 inches and requires a negative that size, if you can believe it, that I put on a sheet of watercolor paper and take it out in full sunlight to print it for maybe 10 minutes. But let me define where this process gets its name. This is called a gum bichromate process, which is really a description of the two main chemicals that make this light sensitive. Gum arabic is one chemical, and you discover that that's in a lot of food, so it's very non-toxic. But the bichromate in gum bichromate has to do with potassium bichromate or ammonium bichromate, which is a little more poisonous. But when you mix the two of them together, it makes a light-sensitive emulsion. And the best part is the third part, which is that you get your choice of what color photographs you're going to make. That makes gum printing one of the most unique processes in the history of photography, because you're not stuck with brown like you are in platinum or black and white as you are in gelatin silver. You can make gum bichromate prints in any color of watercolor that you can squeeze out of a tube and mix in there. Very exciting. And this one gum print gets its different colors from different exposures with the same negative. I'll mix up gum arabic and ammonium dichromate, or today we call them dichromate instead of bichromate. But I'll mix gum and a dichromate, and then I'll squish in greens if I want green layers, and then I'll brush that onto a sheet of watercolor paper until it's dry. Then I'll take a negative the same size, and in a few minutes we should talk about how the introduction of digital photography actually really helped out these 19th century processes. But we'll get to that. Anyway, I am now able to make a 20 by 24 inch negative on my Epson or Canon printer, same size as the image. Coat the watercolor paper with a certain color, and it's light sensitive, so you're doing this under yellow safe light. Let it dry, and then put the big negative in contact with it. Put that in a contact printing frame, which is like a picture frame that you put the negative and the watercolor paper into. You smash it under pressure, contact printing frame. Presses the negative really heavily against the watercolor paper so you get good contact, good detail. Take that in the sunlight. It's really a fun 19th century way of printing, because you just lean it against a tree in full sunlight for maybe 10 minutes, and you can be eating a sandwich or reading a book, but you're actually hard at work printing, so it's very fun to do these 19th century processes where a lot of it is just waiting out in a sunny day. So after one exposure, I get my green image, but I'm not really satisfied with just a green image. And so the gum print is developed face down in a tray of water, just room temperature tap water, with all the lights on, face down. That gives me my green image. After about an hour of soaking, I hang it up to dry. When it's dry, I mix up another color, like brown, using sepia or burnt umber watercolor brown. Make a whole new emulsion, coat it onto the surface of watercolor paper, let it dry, then put my negative back in exact contact, in exact registration. I have to put my negative, it's the same negative, but I'm printing it a second time now. And I have to make sure that I put my negative in exactly the same place. When you look up the term glutton for punishment in the dictionary, there's a picture of us. And speaking of gum bichromate printing, these two prints are side by side, and they really serve as a great example to show you how broad and flexible and malleable gum printing can be. Take a look at these two images, which were made years apart, but this is a gum bichromate print, and this is a gum bichromate print, which shows you the vastly different results you can get with your different techniques that you use. This actually image is taken in the Sonora Desert, and I was very influenced by the writings of Carlos Castaneda, who was wildly popular as a writer maybe 30 years ago. And he's the guy who went down to Mexico and hung out with Mexican sorcerers, and they were able to have coyotes come and talk to them and tell them the secrets of the world. So I've always had that in the back of my mind when I'm wandering through Joshua Tree, or here, which is near and dear to me. This is the Sonora Desert just outside of Tucson, where I was born. So I've got lizard blood in me as well. So this is a cyanotype, and then a gum print over it, a green gum print, then with lots of watercolor. You know, another cool thing about gum printing is that you print on watercolor paper, not glossy photo paper, which I feel is pretty hostile. You know, the glossy paper just kind of repels almost everything. But here, if you make a gum print, you're printing on store-bought Arches actual watercolor paper, Fabriano, any brand. So it's willing for you to get out your watercolors and add color with brushes. So really, I started with a blue image in the sky, a cyanotype. Then I made a green gum print and actually tore the edges of the gum print and glued that to the background. Then I went in with watercolors, colored pencil, and these spots up in the sky are me spattering paint into the sky. Versus less watercoloring in this image of vines at Villa Montalvo in Los Gatos. Much more brooding, but two different ways to go with the same process. This is a great introduction to what I love about handmade books. I love their texture, I love pages, and in this case, this is another silver print made in the darkroom of my friend who was kind enough to wade out into the San Francisco Bay to pose for my big idea of a businessman who missed his plane. This is Alcatraz out here, but this is a black and white silver print that I hand-colored with oil paints. Oils will stick to photo surfaces, photo paper. So greens and blues to add a little color. But what I love this open book format for is the ability to combine a photograph with text. It's a really sneaky way to include text in your work. So this says, "Somewhere a man's shoes are wet." And if you have a good look at it, you'll see that I've torn many pages so that the words almost seem randomly there. These words are on different pages, different levels of pages, but it looks just by chance the word "somewhere a man's shoes are wet," remains. So for anybody who loves texture, this is just so fun to tear papers like this. And I should say that I think there are two kinds of artists in the world, two kinds of people, and some people are born tight and some people are born loose. And I happen to be one of those tight people, and each kind of person envies the other. Tight people are the ones that can do math and they can follow road directions and read a map, whereas loose people are comfortable with things that are imperfect, which just drives tight people crazy. But I mention all this because I have confessed I'm one of those tight people, and so I'll spend 20 minutes tearing a piece of paper so carefully that my hope is it doesn't look like some maniacal person spent 20 minutes tearing a piece of paper to make it look like it wasn't torn. But example of an open book. Other examples where I'm able to write on the surface of a print. This is a good introduction to something that I also really enjoy doing in my art. I love to add little hints or little treasures for you to discover. And I keep in mind that sometimes my hints are not discovered. But in this case, my wife was kind enough to be my model with our dog, Kodak. And I just had this idea about Pavlov. And you know, Pavlov, I think he was Russian, the scientist who discovered that if you rang a bell and you fed dogs and you associated ringing the bell with feeding dogs, that they'd actually, the next time you ring the bell, they'd just start salivating. So he made these big discoveries. But I thought, what would happen if his wife kind of ruined his test subjects, like his dogs? What if she pampered them, you know, or fed them without ringing a bell? So this is kind of an homage to Pavlov's wife. You know, I mentioned that I love to hide little clues or little discoveries in my work sometimes. And again, I realize most people won't get my little clues, so therefore I try and make artwork that's interesting enough without needing people to get this little hidden treasure. But every now and then people do get it, and they are just thrilled that I put these little hints in here. This is a great example of that. This is called Stikine Beckons Me to a New Adventure. And for 1 out of 10 people, they just smiled because they know that Stikine was John Muir's dog and joined him on one of his most beloved adventures when John Muir headed out into a not quite a hurricane, but a heck of a storm with this little dog, and they were jumping over glaciers or crevasses. I mean, just totally life-threatening, wild winds blowing. It's a very short story, and I really recommend it. It is one of John Muir's most popular stories. It's called Stikine, about his long day, almost falling in crevasses many times with this little dog. So this is my crazy dog, and he's beckoning me to an adventure. This is up near Lake Tahoe in a little hut near Fallen Leaf Lake, and my dog is beckoning me, you know, he's saying, let's go have fun. So that reminded me of the story of Stikine, who was always asking John Muir to go out and jump over infinitely deep crevasses together in storms. This body of work is from a series I called Explorers Sketchbooks, and I'm trying really hard to come up with distressed looking images. These are pigment prints, but I have, again, spattered them with paint, try and make them look like they're spotted from age. The official word is foxing. If you had a really old book, you know, an old family book that goes back many generations, you'll notice the pages are yellowing and they're starting to get little dots on them, little dots of mold. So I'll actually try and conjure up that same kind of aging and distressing. And since these are explorers notebooks, you have to have an alligator. It's important to have an alligator in any collection of 19th century explorers sketchbooks. So this is called A Dangerous Acquaintance. And again, I didn't want it to be too obvious, but if you give this a little bit of time, you'll notice this one explorer's boot over here on the shoreline, and it didn't go so well for him. And here's our friendly alligator out in the pond waiting for us to make the same mistake. And this is the most recent artwork I made, and one of my favorites. I'm trying a new strategy here, and that is this grid format, and I call this a map to a miner's cabin. And this is actually pictures I took along the way to an actual miner's cabin. This is a huge reward if you can find it, and it is an intact miner's cabin. It's a miracle. Nobody took his bottles or his food cans. Nobody broke his glass window. He created this incredible little house inside of boulders. And I give little hints about following the trail, stopping for lunch, finding other ruins along the way. Little hints, again, another nod to my main man, Carlos Castaneda. Well, datura is all over the place out in the Southwest Desert, which is also called the devil's weed. Ranchers call it Jimson weed. Cows eat it and they go crazy. But Carlos Castaneda and other shamans and sorcerers down in Mexico and in the southern United States, if you're very knowledgeable, you can take just a little bit of this datura plant and you'll have visions. Carlos Castaneda swears that he flew, and landed a mile away, flew like a crow. So I thought it was only fitting to include a little bit of otherworldliness in this image. And of course, a friend of mine who did in fact put a scorpion on their arm and felt that if you had a calm mindset, the scorpion wouldn't bite you. But since I never have a calm mindset, I did not put a scorpion on my arm. I also have to include my little coyote friends in there. But anyway, different kind of artwork, as though you read it left to right, and this takes you on a journey to a miner's cabin.